So after making my way through the gloomy atmosphere of Rapture in Bioshock and Bioshock 2, I was pretty excited to experience the change of setting for the series' next title. Bioshock Infinite released in 2013, 3 years after the previous entry, and garnered positive reviews all round. The game was praised for its graphical finesse, tight and responsive gunplay, and immersive world design. The setting of Columbia was a refreshing change of pace, and the characters were actually likeable, and the gameplay did introduce some innovative ideas to the core experience. Mechanics like the tears and the skyhook were actually fun additions that just about managed to keep the game from getting too stale too fast. So it's a real shame that the ending completely shits the bed then, isn't it? Okay, so that sounded a bit harsh, but it is genuinely disappointing when a consistently enjoyable experience becomes overtly convoluted and tedious in its final moments. It's just a bit of a letdown and leaves you with a slight sour taste. Don't get me wrong, I do actually like this game, aside from the absolute clusterfuck of an ending and the fact that the game drags on for just a little too long in my opinion. I do enjoy Bioshock Infinite. Where I think the issues lie is that the developers, Irrational Games, were so concerned with making a big twist and crafting a quote-unquote smart ending that they really dropped the ball with the other parts of the game. I know it sounds confusing because I just praised the other sections and criticized the ending, but the more you think about the climax, the less sense everything else makes. When I finished Bioshock Infinite, I thought, yeah, that was a good game, a surprising twist, great experience. Then I found myself getting up to go to the bathroom at 2 AM thinking, wait, that doesn't make much sense at all. Okay, so I've beat around the bush for long enough. Spoiler territory now, let's talk about Bioshock Infinite. The game begins with our protagonist, Booker DeWitt, on his way to a nearby lighthouse after being sent on a mission by the Lutesses. Bring us the girl and wipe away the debt. Booker sits down in a chair at the top of the lighthouse and gets launched thousands of feet into the air and eventually reaches Columbia, the city in the sky. He makes his way through Columbia trying to find the girl, but has a bit of a difficult time since the mark on his hand identifies him as the false shepherd. Booker eventually meets the girl named Elizabeth, and the two end up going on an adventure, doing all sorts of things. To be honest, they don't really have a single objective for most of the game, they sort of just hop around from place to place. Oh, and I should probably mention that Elizabeth can open tears in the fabric of reality, which act as portals to other dimensions. So Columbia is led by Zachary Hale Comstock, a super religious nut that always goes out of his way to stop Booker and Elizabeth from doing whatever they're currently trying to do. In the game's climax, Booker kills Comstock and is ready to call it a day, but Elizabeth isn't content with just killing one Comstock. She wants to use her powers to stop Comstock from ever existing. She takes Booker through multiple parallel worlds and brings him back in time to an earlier point in his life. After committing some horrible acts in the War of Wounded Knee, Booker's mental health started to deteriorate, so at some point afterwards he sought to be baptized in the hope of God forgiving him for his sins. After the baptism, he changed his name to Zachary Hale Comstock, found religion, and became the leader of a floating city. However, in another timeline, Booker changed his mind at the last minute and refused the baptism. In this timeline, he didn't change his name and grew up to be our playable protagonist. So Booker and Comstock are the same person. About halfway through the game, it's revealed that Elizabeth is Comstock's daughter. But then in the climax, we discover that Elizabeth is actually Anna DeWitt, Booker's daughter. Booker racked up some debt that he couldn't pay and so agreed to give his daughter to Comstock in exchange for his debt being cleared and being given a clean slate. Booker changes his mind at the last minute, however, and tries to get Anna back, but it's too late to stop her from being taken. The only part of her being left behind being the tip of her finger, which explains why Elizabeth wears the thimble on her right hand and how she's able to open the tears, because she simultaneously exists in two parallel worlds, her finger in Booker's and the rest of her in Comstock's. Racked with guilt, Booker brands his daughter's initials onto the back of his hand so that he never forgets what he did, and this brand is what ends up being the quote-unquote mark of the false shepherd. So this sounds all fine and dandy, right? Good twist, ties up all the loose ends. Yeah, but then this happens. As I mentioned earlier, Elizabeth isn't content with just killing Comstock. She wants to erase him from reality and make it so he never even existed in the first place. So she takes Booker back in time to the day of the baptism and holds him under the water, drowning him. This will change the future, preventing our protagonist, Booker DeWitt, but also the antagonist, Zachary Comstock, from existing from that point onwards. And that's the end. Except that if you follow the rules that Bioshock Infinite establishes, it doesn't work. Let me explain. So there is a blatant plot hole here that kind of undermines the whole story and absolutely obliterates any sense of immersion that the ending could have mustered up. But it is possible to wash this plot hole away with a simple answer, but that answer in turn makes the plot hole 1,000 times worse. So hear me out. Plot hole A, the grandfather paradox. I feel like most people are familiar with this one, but just in case you're not, the grandfather paradox is a logical dilemma where if one could theoretically go back in time and murder their own grandfather, what would happen? Well, we don't know. It's a logical and scientific impossibility. Your grandfather being dead would prevent the birth of your father and in turn yourself, but if you never existed, there would be nobody to go back in time to kill your grandfather. See, it doesn't make sense. Elizabeth drowning her father before her birth would prevent her from existing in the first place, and in turn prevent her from drowning Booker. Now the logical answer that negates plot hole A, and is supported by the rules established by the game, is that Bioshock Infinite isn't a story of just straight up time travel. It's a story of multiverses and infinite worlds that differ from each other, either slightly or significantly. It's not Back to the Future, it's more like Donnie Darko or Cloverfield. So this answer tells us that Elizabeth isn't straight up going back in time to murder her father, she's killing a Booker from an alternate universe. Welcome to plot hole B, it doesn't matter anyway. Elizabeth's plan to kill young Booker would indeed prevent either Comstock or the Booker we know from existing, but there are still infinite universes where Elizabeth hasn't killed her father. There are universes where she was never even born. There are universes where Booker would fight back and not allow her to drown him. The plan makes no sense. Now the frustrating thing about the Bioshock Infinite fanbase is that there are a lot of pretentious people that simply brush away any critics who have issues with the plot by saying, you just don't understand it. So I've gone to the effort of mapping out a timeline just to illustrate my point. Our timeline starts after the Battle of Wounded Knee when Booker attends the baptism. In one timeline he changes his mind and remains Booker DeWitt. We'll call this timeline A. In the other, timeline B, he goes through with it and becomes Comstock. In timeline B, Comstock wants a child to fulfill his prophecy, but has unfortunately become sterile due to travelling through the tears too much. We'll get back to that later. Incapable of producing his own young, Comstock jumps over to timeline A and makes an offer to Booker DeWitt. In this timeline, Booker has accrued an enormous amount of debt and so accepts Comstock's offer. His debt cleared for his only child. Comstock takes baby Anna back to timeline B and raises her as Elizabeth. Then 19 years pass and the Luteces from timeline B hop over to timeline A and task Booker with bringing Elizabeth back to them. I know I haven't mentioned who the Luteces are, but I will get around to that. Now this is where the start of the game takes place. You play through the game as you would, you're having a great time, and then this little plot point happens. Booker is tasked with retrieving some guns for Daisy Fitzroy in return for a trip on her airship. Only when we get to Chen Lin, the gunsmith, he's already dead. Not a problem, says Elizabeth, we'll open up a tear to a universe where Chen Lin is still alive. Perfect. Except that everybody you killed in the other universe is now slowly losing their minds because they can remember their deaths? Also, when they get to Chen Lin, not only is he losing his mind since he already died, but he doesn't have his gunsmithing tools since they were confiscated. So Booker and Elizabeth jump through another tier, which I'm pretty confident is the universe they stay in until the game's climax. And this climax is where Elizabeth takes us back to before the original split in the timeline happened, and kills us here so that neither future occurs. No Comstock, no debt, no Elizabeth. The game kind of implies that this change is made absolute across every single universe, since once Booker drowns, all the Elizabeths start to fade from existence. But as I mentioned earlier, there are infinite possibilities. Infinite possibilities where Booker doesn't die and Comstock comes around regardless. There's a universe where Elizabeth has a sex change and calls herself Clive. Anything could, can, and will happen. No matter how slight, there are an unlimited number of universes where everything's the same, bar one minute thing. There's a world where the events of the game play out exactly the same way, but Booker wears a fez the whole time. Every seemingly insignificant choice that doesn't amount to anything in the game splits that timeline and creates a new reality. If you try to throw the ball at the announcer, you'll eventually be led to a path where you're asked to pick a brooch, a bird, or a cage. The choice makes no difference, but that's just another deviation. Now if you throw the ball at the couple, you will still have to choose a brooch, but these two small decisions that make no change whatsoever to the plot lead the player to a potential 4 different timelines. There's probably an outcome where the Luteces don't intervene and bring Booker over to timeline B so that the game's plot never happens. There's gonna be a split earlier on in timeline A where everything's the same except Booker never gets into debt. Once you begin to realize how overtly convoluted the multiverse theory is, you come to understand how the ending didn't change anything to anywhere near the scope that the game would have you believe. But it's not just the ending that seems to fall apart when you take a look at the game with this train of thought. When Booker and Elizabeth find Chen-Lin dead, they travel to another universe where he's still alive. They both still seem absolutely fixed on getting these guns for Fitzroy, but how do they know that she still even wants them in this world? Maybe she won't hold up to her end of the deal because in this world, she never even made the deal. Maybe Fitzroy doesn't even have control of the airship in this timeline. They never stop to consider these things. The game just seems to try to brush this aside much later on when Elizabeth spouts some mumbo jumbo about how every universe has constants and variables. There are certain events that are set up to a fixed point in reality. There will always be a man, a city, and a lighthouse. But how do we know what is and isn't a constant? This reveal doesn't provide new information that makes this world make any more sense. This is lazy writing. The only constant that I can think of that has to exist is the presence of the Luteces. This man and woman occasionally pop up throughout your story, make some sarcastic comments, and then proceed to promptly disappear. We initially believe them to be siblings, maybe even twins, but the reveal that we get is actually much more interesting. Robert and Rosalind Lutece are the same person. Both are genius quantum physicists that were born in 2 different realities. The same person, but in one universe a boy, and a girl in the other. They managed to communicate to each other through dimensions via Morse code, and were eventually able to cross a bridge into the same world. It's the Luteces that allowed Comstock to make the deal with Booker. It was the Luteces that allowed Booker to travel to Columbia in order to retrieve Elizabeth. Without these two being a constant, then nothing works. Other than that, the whole constant and variables thing is just a cheap trick to simulate the idea that the writers knew what the hell they were talking about. It seems that Ken Levine and crew were so preoccupied with making a game that was clever that they naturally fell short in other ideas. The vigor seems so out of place in Columbia. The city's general populace doesn't really seem to partake in them, and their uses are so video gamey. In the original Bioshock, the plasmids were created thanks to Andrew Ryan's philosophy, allowing scientists to experiment without any concern for budget or moral issues. He allowed them to just get on with it. Plus, they granted the user abilities that could be useful in day-to-day life. Electrobolt could be used to power things that require electrical currents. Telekinesis would be amazing to grab a hold of things that are out of reach, and Incinerate would make it incredibly easy to burn fuel or to light a cigarette. When you compare them to Bioshock Infinite's vigors, it's night and day. The Devil's Kiss vigor is a portable napalm bomb. Murder of Crows just sends a swarm of killer birds to devour their victims alive, and Possession allows you to take control of any random nearby machine. What on earth were the people of Columbia thinking to make these things publicly accessible via vending machines? Why are they even here in Columbia? I can tell you why, because they were in Bioshock 1. Also, the vigors seem far more advanced than the plasmids, considering the vigors were available for use in 1912, and the plasmids were only finished by 1960. The product got heavily downgraded over the span of 48 years. I do remember reading a note or picking up a voxophone or something that stated that whoever created the vigors were considering making them injectable substances to keep the cost down. But that's not it. The plasmids in Bioshock were highly addictive, which is evidenced by all of the junky splicers roaming around Rapture. In Colombia, not only do people not really use the Vigors, but absolutely nobody is hooked on the stuff. And Vigors are far easier to consume, considering it's just a quick swig of a liquid and doesn't involve jabbing yourself in the arm with a giant syringe. I don't think much thought went into the handymen either. It just seems like the team thought, Bioshock 1 had Big Daddies, Bioshock Infinite needs Big Daddies. The handymen are apparently half human, half cyborgs that were originally people with disabilities or severely deteriorating bodies, and so saw the giant robot body as a potential upgrade? I don't know, I must have missed when they explained this in the game. I got all of that from the Bioshock fandom wiki. Rapture's Big Daddies were intimidating foes that would normally require a good amount of planning and bravery to take down. Since they only normally attacked after being provoked, you would have time to lay traps down and lure the thing to where you needed it to be. The handymen are just robot hulks that jump out of nowhere and just keep smashing until one of you is dead. How fun. I think that the developers spent so much time patting each other on the back for their great twist that they didn't even fully consider what certain plot points imply. When jumping across universes, people who died in another reality seem to remember their death and mentally break down. But surely, across the infinite amount of worlds out there, everybody is dead in at least one of them. Does it only happen if you're dead in loads of them? Does it only happen if you die in a reality that is super duper close to your current one, only separated by a slight variable? We don't know, the game doesn't tell us. But despite what you're all thinking, I don't hate this game. I do actually like it, as I mentioned at the start of the video. But the game gets so much praise, which is well deserved, but I feel like a lot of people just forget about it once the credits roll. It's only when you're randomly thinking about it in the McDonald's drive-thru that it all just starts to fall apart. The game has its flaws, many of which I'm led to believe were due to studio interference. Things like all of the first-person shooter tropes that are just crammed into the thing willy-nilly, like the regenerating shield, like the 2-weapon carry limit, and the sprint button. But I do enjoy Bioshock Infinite, from the very start to the very end. It's just best you stop thinking about it right after. Or you could just get a life and stop looking for stupid little nitpicks in a fun action-adventure video game like I did. Hey everybody, thank you all very much for watching. I do hope you enjoyed. I know I said it a couple times in this video, but I do want to hammer home the point that I don't dislike this game. I actually really like it. It's a fun experience from start to finish, but it has got some issues that I feel like need to be pointed out. But this video does bring my analysis and interpretation of the Bioshock series to a close, so I hope you enjoyed. I'm not really sure what I'm going to be working on next. I'm thinking of playing through Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice. I got it on release. I didn't play it a lot, so I need to give that another go. Maybe I'll do that. Maybe it'll be something completely different. I don't know. You'll know because the video will be up, but I don't know yet. So, yeah, don't forget to leave a like if you did enjoy. Subscribe to keep up with anything I make, and I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya.